You guys believe in duendes?
Hell yeah,
Yeah, bro.
What?
I seen one. It was fucking weird, bro. I remember it was at this house that we live in right now too, and there's two glass sliding doors, and I remember the one on the right, it was open, and he moved in and he started waving down to like get my attention, like teasing me. As soon as I looked that way, it moves out the way. I couldn't tell what he was wearing, but I remember it was like small and it had like a red hat. And I was like, well, what the fuck was that? I thought I was tripping. I'm like, I'm just gonna ignore it. And I go back to eating. And again, it happened. And he does the same thing. I get up, I open the door, and nothing was there. And it happened like I kid you not 4 or 3 times until like I got up, I closed the door, I took my cereal, I threw it away, and I was like, man, I'm gonna go to bed. Fuck this guy.
Recently, my godmother, she told me a story when she was 7 years old. She was out in the front playing with her like siblings and stuff. Out of nowhere, she hears like giggling, and she doesn't know where it's coming from. And then she turns around, and then she sees 4 duendes, but they're like dancing and laughing, but like they're in the formation of, you know how like when they're holding up a coffin, like 2 people in the front, 2 people in the back. They were in that formation. And they were holding a little coffin, and the way she described them, like they were wearing a big ass sombrero, big ears, the big nose and stuff, like the typical duende description or whatever. And then her mom turns pale, and she thought she was tripping because she saw the exact same thing too.
I know in the San Bernardino area, where like near Cal State, San Bernardino, it's like a mountain area.
Going up to Lake Arrowhead.
That's where like people still live up there, saying that there's duendes roaming around that area.
Actually,
On August 23, 1987, in Alexander, Arkansas, 2 teenage boys, Don Henry, 16 years old, and Kevin Ives, 17 years old, left to do some late-night hunting. Their hunting trip would become a tragedy. Don's dad, Curtis, received a phone call that the boys were found shot and tied to the railroad tracks. He contacted Kevin's mom, Linda, and they both met with the police at Don's house. The authorities eventually told the parents that the boys had been fatally run over by a train at 4:25 a.m. There were 19 grams of cannabis found on Kevin, and the original theory from the police is that the boys high on cannabis died accidentally or they killed themselves in a suicide pact. The boys' parents did not believe this was the case. The crime scene was not taped off and not treated like a proper crime scene, and not all of the body parts were collected. Rick Elmendorf, the chief deputy in Saline County, stated that they hadn't ruled anything out except foul play. They had ruled that out. This was not a murder. The police wanted you to know that. Why? How do they know this so quickly? I mean, it's definitely a little peculiar, right? The parents of the victims feel like not enough is being done. These 2 young boys are found dead in a brutal way, and they say, oh, they just smoked a lot of weed, went and laid on the tracks and died. And that's it. We're not going to investigate this any further. That's all that we're going to talk about it. Oh yeah, remember, it is not a homicide.
this is by far one of the worst ways somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This was 35-year-old Jill Greninger, and she was employed at Economy Locker Storage Company that was in Muncie Township, Pennsylvania. And inside of this factory, they had a bunch of industrial-sized meat grinders. The meat grinder that was involved in this story, I don't know exactly what style it was, but every single picture I pull up has this type of design. On April 22nd, 2019, Jill Greninger was inside of the factory hard at work. And what unfolded next, nobody is 100% sure about. There weren't any cameras that saw it happen, and there weren't any human witnesses that saw it happen. Jill was on top of a rolling ladder above one of the meat grinders, and they either speculate that a piece of her clothing got caught in the blades, or she simply just slipped and fell into it. Regardless of how it happened, Jill fell into the meat grinder. She would fall headfirst into a bladed system like this. Another employee inside of the building heard some sort of horrific sounds coming from one of the machines. The coworker then went over and noticed that Jill fell into the meat grinder. Since Jill fell into the meat grinder headfirst, the coroner believes that she hopefully died almost instantly. The head portion of Jill's body was basically gone. After this incident, the factory was investigated, and they found 11 serious violations inside that factory, and because of these violations, the company was fined $49,000. This death is just so awful because can you imagine how terrifying those first few seconds were for Jill when she fell into the meat grinder? I also find it weird how the fine was so low, especially when these safety issues resulted in a death. But nonetheless, this death is absolutely awful, and may Jill Greninger rest in peace.
A woman found a mysterious briefcase at her front door. Moments later, it would kill her and her family. This case is absolutely full of twists and turns. It was November 1985 in Texas. The Blount family were enjoying their Thanksgiving when an unexpected tragedy would occur. The family members in attendance included the dad Joe, the wife Susan, and the daughter Angela and the cousin Mike. Now, as I said, the family had had a lovely Thanksgiving, and at around 9 p.m. that evening, Joe, Angela, and Mike headed out to the shops in the car along with another family member. Susan decided to just have a lie down. She'd had a really, obviously quite a full-on day, so she was just having a rest when she heard a knock at the door. She initially went to the door to see who it was, but couldn't see anybody, so she went and lay back down. When the family members returned from the shops, they noticed a briefcase at the front door. They took it inside, presuming someone may have just left it behind. When Angela opened it inside of the home, there was a huge explosion. Joe, Angela, and Mike were killed instantly by the blast. Police arrived to the home, which, as you can see, was in an absolutely shocking state. Police started questioning neighbours, and one of the neighbours actually made quite a shocking revelation. He said he was actually involved in illegal weapons sales, and he believed that he could potentially have been the intended target. Frustratingly, there was a real lack of physical evidence in this case and no suspects, so the case went cold. That was until around 10 years later, when a prison inmate claimed that another inmate had confessed to the bombing. Michael Toney was in prison for a burglary. He'd been talking with fellow inmate Jack Ferris about the bombing. Jack told officers that Michael had actually confessed to the bombing to him. Now, Jack was actually released from prison because of this admission. Michael's wife was actually questioned about this, and at first she told them that there was no way that he could have done it, and then she changed her tune. She said she recalled seeing Mike with a briefcase. Michael was then charged with the bombing. Now, Jack later redacted his statement and said that him and Mike had come up with this plan together to help Jack get out of prison. Despite Jack admitting to this, Michael was still convicted of the triple murder and actually sentenced to death. Eventually, the conviction was overturned and it was revealed that 14 key pieces of evidence were withheld, which would have been key to his defence. In another twist in this case, he was released from prison in September 2009, finally thinking he was free to live his life, and tragically, just 1 month later, he was killed in a car accident. The triple murder case remains unsolved to this day.
This paranormal investigator, his name is Antonio Zamudio, and the story began with this 11-year-old boy. His name was Augusto. He ends up buying this doll at a garage sale, not knowing that it was obviously possessed and stuff, but
Bro, I think I seen this before, bro.
it has long hands and long arms.
That's it? That's the real doll?
Yes. And he brings it back to the house, and that's when all the paranormal stuff starts happening. But it's not like your typical
Open door.
things being flown around. It's more of the mom and the dad hearing voices in the middle of the night. They hear him always talking to the doll. Him waking up at 3 a.m. just to go to the living room and turn on the TV. She's noticing all this weird behavior, and then she just has enough. So she's like, you know what? This doll is ugly, it's dirty, I'm just gonna get rid of it. So without telling Augusto,
Gets rid of it.
and then 3 days later it ends up reappearing at the edge of the bed of Augusto. That's when she calls Antonio. Antonio gets there. He starts setting up static cameras around. Nothing really happens until Augusto goes to sleep in his room, and he captures on camera the doll literally running to Augusto's room. Like,
Doll moved?
yes, there's the doll right there. Okay. Bro, it gets up and runs.
Yo, what if you see that, bro? Nah.
I'm gonna try to
First of all,
burn it or
bro,
something. I don't know.
First of all, why would the kid like the doll, bro? It looks scary.
And shout out to Podcast Paranormal.
This disgusting pedophile was captured after using PayPal to purchase CP and CSAM. This is 24-year-old Nicholas Brenshaw from Utah. So investigators started looking into Nicholas in the year 2013. And from December of 2013 to July of 2016, authorities found that Nicholas paid over $2,700 to illegal websites to purchase CP. And while authorities were investigating Nicholas and discovering his disturbing secrets, they found that he was chatting with 19-year-old Elijah Roberts, also from Utah. So Elijah and Nicholas would use apps like Kik and Wicker, I've never heard of Wicker, to exchange CP materials. They would also chat about their deep, disturbing desires to be alone with children. These chats were allegedly extremely graphic and extremely disturbing. So when pedophile Elijah Roberts was arrested in 2016, the authorities found out that he had also allegedly assaulted a 14-year-old boy. He was also found to have been offering this young boy to other men online, meaning he wanted people to come over and assault this boy too. Thankfully though, both of these freaks were sent to prison, But sadly, Elijah was sentenced to only 60 months in prison. This is only 5 years. I think both of them deserve longer sentences, but what can I say? This is America. We prefer to punish drug users as opposed to pedophiles.
This is by far one of the worst ways somebody has ever died, and this is a massive trigger warning. If you are claustrophobic or triggered by MRI machines, I don't recommend watching this video. This is an MRI machine, and MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. These machines use extremely strong magnetic fields. These are pictures of incidents involving MRI machines that didn't result in anybody's death. This is just to give you an example of how strong the magnets are. These machines will literally take anything magnetic. This brings us to the story of 32-year-old Rajesh Maru. In January of 2018, he was in the hospital with a relative who was scheduled to get an MRI scan. The family member that he was with needed an oxygen tank, so he was holding it for them. Now, if you ever got an MRI scan, you know that the staff is very informative about nothing metallic ever being in the room, not even your keys. So Rajesh was standing outside of the room where the MRI scan was being done. Now, there was obviously an attendant there that had no idea how these machines worked. While Rajesh was holding the oxygen tank, he was told by the attendant, it was okay to go into the room even though the MRI machine was on. And when Rajesh got within 4 feet of the MRI machine, within seconds he was sucked into the MRI machine. This is an illustration of what happened. Now, you may ask, why didn't he just drop the oxygen tank? Well, he had no time. Literally, the moment the magnetic field caught it, he just got pulled. Now, he did not die from any impact. It was much, much worse. Since he was instantly sucked into the MRI machine with the oxygen tank in his hand got stuck between the wall of the MRI machine and the oxygen tank, which caused the oxygen tank to leak, which then became a liquid, which in liquid form is extremely poisonous. Rajesh was then inhaling all of these fumes into his lungs. They said within 15 seconds his entire body bloated up and turned solid black. He would actually die from pneumothorax, which is when excess air enters your lungs causing them to collapse. 3 hospital staff members were arrested and they were charged with death by negligence. This death is absolutely awful, and I now have a fear of MRI machines.
This is a disturbing case of the Slender Man stabbing. On the morning of the 31st of May 2014, a man on a bike ride in Wisconsin made a shocking discovery. A 12-year-old girl, Peyton Leutner, was lying on the grass covered in blood. The day prior, the young girl had been at a sleepover with some of her friends. She hadn't realised that the sleepover had been a trick to lure her into the woods to murder her. 2 years before what the media dubbed the Slender Man stabbing, Peyton had met her friend Morgan at school. The pair had become friends when Peyton noticed her sitting alone in the cafeteria and felt sorry for her. The two became close, and then they made another friend, Anissa Weir. Anissa, on the left here, was described as a cruel girl. She seemed really jealous of the friendship between Peyton and Morgan. As their friendship grew, Anissa and Morgan became obsessed with the internet meme Slender Man. Slender Man was a tall, faceless man with long arms who turned viral when people would Photoshop him into creepy images. The mythical man would prey on young children and lure them into the woods to kill people. Shockingly, around December 2013, Morgan and Anissa concocted a plan to kill someone in order to show their dedication to the fictional Slender Man. Their plan was to invite Peyton to Morgan's birthday to get her alone, and then lure her into the woods and kill her. Morgan actually described this as a flawless plan. As the girls started their walk to the woods, Morgan snuck a knife from her kitchen into her waistband. They then completely blindsided poor Peyton. Morgan jumped on top of her and started stabbing her. The two perpetrators then run off, claiming that they were going to go and get help. The young girl was left to struggle on her own and crawl towards the road to get help. When the cyclist discovered her, an ambulance arrived and nurses noted that she had 19 stab wounds. She had 6 hours of intensive surgery but miraculously survived. The girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Now, the jury actually found Morgan not criminally responsible due to schizophrenia. She was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa had apparently experienced shared psychotic disorder and was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health institution.
One of the most disturbing games that was said to come out of the dark web. It's called Sad Satan. I don't know if you ever heard about this.
I don't know what you're talking about.
It wasn't your regular video game. It's more of a walking simulator, and you're just walking through a maze, and you also hear eerie dialogue in the background played backwards, or songs played backwards. You don't gotta go through no levels. You don't level up. You don't gotta fight no bad guys, no criminals, nothing like that. You just literally just walk, and then you're bombarded with like a bunch of like different pictures. The pictures are disturbing. It ranges from gore to CP.
No way.
And Sad Satan is available to the public for regular people, like Google, all that shit. And you could buy it like on Amazon or anywhere else where you could download games. But the only reason why it's available is because that's not the actual true version of it. It's the clean version, because there's 3 versions to this game. It all started in 2015 when a YouTuber named Obscure Horror Corner, I believe, he posted this video game, the gameplay of it, the origin of it, where it came from. Like, nobody really knew, because the person behind the YouTube channel, he said that a subscriber anonymously sent it to him and said that it was from the dark web, and he played it.
I'm kind of scared, bro. So how come all these YouTubers didn't get in trouble?
Because this version that he's playing, Obscure Horror, that's the original version, but nobody has access to that game. There was a
will never make sense to me how someone can completely vanish within a matter of minutes. A case that will forever haunt me is the disappearance of 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley. He was on a Boy Scout camping trip with his dad in the Uinta Mountains in Utah when he mysteriously disappeared. He was last seen at around 8 in the morning on August 20th, 2004. He was fishing with his dad on Q-Burnt Lake when he accidentally stepped in the water and got his shoes, pants, and socks wet. Garrett told his dad that he wanted to walk back to the campsite to grab some dry shoes because he was uncomfortable. The campsite, along with the other 18 Boy Scouts and 6 adults, was only about 250 feet away, and it was pretty much a straight path up the hill. Garrett had walked that path multiple times and told his dad that he wouldn't be long, so his dad said that he could walk back by himself. But his dad watched as Garrett walked around the lake and out of view, and he even yelled out directions for Garrett just in case. He watched Garrett walk towards the campsite and then went back to fishing. But after about 20 minutes, his dad wondered what was taking so long, so he walked back to the campsite, but Garrett was nowhere to be found. None of the other Boy Scouts or adults saw him, and it appeared that he never actually made it back to the campsite. A massive search was launched right away, like before authorities even came, but it was like Garrett vanished into thin air. Hundreds of officials and volunteers searched on foot, on horseback, and they even brought in tracking dogs. But the only thing ever found was one of Garrett's Nike socks. It was found half a mile away from where he disappeared in a boulder field. According to the Summit County Sheriff's Office, the sock appeared to have been taken off of a wet foot and wadded up, and this was likely done by Garrett himself. Just based off where it was found, it seems like Garrett might have gotten lost and tried to seek shelter from the cold weather. The night he disappeared, the weather dropped to 18 degrees and it was hailing and raining. Nothing else of Garrett's was ever found, including the black ice fishing pole that he was carrying when he disappeared. Authorities searched a 3-mile radius deep in the mountains where he was last seen, and the search was officially called off after 9 days. To this day, it's not known what truly happened to him that day. Did he get lost and die of exposure? I feel like if he got lost, he would have been found relatively quickly. He did take a lot of wilderness training programs as part of being a Boy Scout. He also knew and had taken that specific path multiple times before, and the search for him started immediately, so it's just weird that they never found anything. Some think that he may have encountered a wild animal, but there were no signs of an animal attack. No blood, no torn clothing, nothing. And I also feel like he would have screamed, and I feel like his dad would have definitely heard that. And some people believe that he may have been abducted, although police say that there isn't enough evidence that points to him being kidnapped. The campsite was on a well-established path that connects to a road about a quarter-mile away, so it's not completely impossible for him to have been abducted by a stranger, but it is really remote up there, making this theory seem not as likely. And there was no evidence of a struggle or any foul play. But 5 years after his disappearance, a woman reported possibly seeing Garrett in a Smith's in Elko, Nevada. She said she saw him with 2 men. Police reviewed the video footage from the store and said that although it's not super clear, the odds of it being Garrett are very slim. The last updates from this were in 2009, and police were trying to figure out who the 2 men were, as nobody in the store knew who they were. So I'm assuming this turned out to not be Garrett, as I'm sure there would have been more coverage on this if that were the case. It's now been 20 years, and whatever happened to Garrett in those mountains remains a mystery.
This is the Bifor Dolphin incident, one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. The Bifor Dolphin was a semi-submersible deep-sea driller. This deep-sea driller could reach depths of 1,500 feet underwater. Now, at around 4 a.m. on November 5th, 1983, 2 of the divers were in the saturation chamber resting. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not really familiar on how this all works, but I'll try and explain it. But 2 divers were returning to the Byford, and they were in a transfer capsule that clamped onto the bottom here. And typical procedure would have them climb up the diving bell, but they would first have to seal that off to depressurize the chamber. Now, one of the divers was trying to close the hatch, but before he could do that, the other diver released the clamp that was securing the capsule to the trunk. And what happened was immediate and absolutely horrifying. So because of that one minor slip up, the entire capsule violently decompressed. And it then completely launched away from the trunk. And the pressure that was already in the chamber went down from 9 atmospheres to 1. And this is where it gets gruesome, and this is where we hope this death was instant. To kind of illustrate what happened, somebody illustrated this image. One of the divers, because of the depressurization, was forced through a 24-inch opening. So this sliver right here that you see, the crab was sucked into it instantly and was gone in a second. And that is exactly what happened to one of the divers. And he was exposed to forces about 25 tons. And his body was absolutely mangled. His body parts were just blown all over the rig. His spine was found outside of the rig, his liver was dissected. And I know you guys are gonna Google this, so yes, there is a picture of his remains. And to be honest, it was kinda weird how easy you could find it. The other divers were completely boiled alive. They had lumps of white fat clogging their arteries and their veins, which led to their blood to flash boil. The autopsy stated that all of these deaths were instant, and that's all we could hope for these people. You really can't fathom how bad this incident was until you see the remains of the victim. It's absolutely sickening, and this is definitely one of the worst deaths imaginable.
One thing that I will never understand is when someone dies from multiple brutal stab wounds in locations that would be impossible to do to yourself, yet police label it a suicide. I'm talking about the death of Hugues de la Plaza, who was found stabbed to death inside of his San Francisco apartment in 2007. I will say, though, that this case is incredibly mysterious, down to the murder weapon never being found, and the fact that he was found dead inside of his locked apartment with no obvious signs of an intruder. On June 2nd, 2007, 36-year-old Hugues went out for a night of partying with his friends at the Underground SF, which is a nightclub in San Francisco. He was a sound engineer and had just gotten a new job, so he was really excited and wanted to celebrate. That night wasn't unusual. He and his friends had fun, he was laughing, and he was hitting on girls like he normally would. He left the bar around 2 a.m. and started his walk back home. He lived in a triplex on 462 Linden Street, and it was about a 10-minute walk, a walk that he'd done many times before. The security camera at his neighbor's unit captured him arriving home. He went inside, and his neighbor heard his door close. All 3 of their front doors are in a row, and the units are pretty much stacked on top of each other, so it was easy to hear what the neighbors were doing. Once Hugues was inside, he made himself a snack, which was rice and peas, and he got on his computer to look at dating sites and real estate in Argentina, as he wanted to buy a house there. What happened after this, no one knows for sure, and it's bizarre. At around 3 in the morning, his neighbor, who was half asleep, was woken up by a loud thud coming from Hugues' unit. The neighbor heard his door open and close, and then a few minutes later open and close again. He then heard footsteps running down the front steps out to the street. The neighbor said that he wasn't overly concerned at this point because it didn't necessarily sound like a fight, so he went back to sleep. But at around 8 the next morning, when another neighbor went outside to get the newspaper, they discovered a gruesome scene. Blood covered the front porch, so they called 911, and when police knocked on Hugues' door and got no response, they went around back. Authorities looked through his kitchen window and saw even more blood, so they kicked down his back door, and that's when they found him. Hugues had been stabbed 3 times in the chest, neck, and abdomen, and it was clear that he died from major blood loss. But here's what's odd. Both the front and the back door had been locked and bolted shut from the inside. No windows had been broken or forced open, and there were no signs of an intruder. Also adding to the mystery is the fact that the murder weapon was missing. At first, San Francisco PD thought that it was a steak knife that was found in the kitchen sink that had a small red substance on it, but that red substance was later found to be tomato sauce. Also adding to the mystery is the fact that blood was everywhere in his apartment, right? But only his footprints were found tracked throughout the house. So because of all of this, San Francisco PD started suspecting that Hugues died by suicide. Their theory was that he possibly took drugs at the bar that night, went home, and then killed himself, brutally stabbing himself 3 times at that. And after doing so, they believe that he went to the kitchen sink and then washed the knife clean. Thus why the murder weapon was never found. In their eyes, if he was attacked, he surely would have yelled or called 911 for help. But according to the autopsy, no drugs were in his system the night he died. The only thing the medical examiner found was small traces of the rice and peas in his stomach that he made for dinner that night. Oog also suffered a number of blunt force trauma injuries as well, including some small abrasions on his forehead, lip, and arm. It's possible that these wounds could have been from self-defense. Although the medical examiner at the scene specifically said, quote, "This is a homicide," they couldn't prove if the stab wounds were self-inflicted or if Oog had been stabbed by someone else. And because there was no initial evidence of a struggle, his manner of death was labeled undetermined. Right off the bat, San Francisco PD believed that this was a suicide, so they really mishandled the investigation and kind of pushed that narrative. But Oog's friends and family believe otherwise. His parents lived in France at the time, and once they learned how their son's case was being handled, they hired a private investigator. And the French government actually got involved because of how questionable San Francisco PD's investigation was. So they sent forensic experts to San Francisco to re-examine the evidence, and those investigators concluded that Oog was murdered. They believed that he opened his door that night and was attacked on the front porch, but made it back inside to lock the door. But because of how severe his neck wound was, he would have died within a minute or two, and sadly just died before he could call 911 for help. They also concluded that the angle the knife went into his body, he just couldn't have done it to himself. This would all make sense considering the knife was never found. In 2009, the Los Angeles Police Department reviewed the case, and they believed that he likely died by suicide. But they did point out all of the flaws in the original investigation done by San Francisco PD. They stated that San Francisco PD had poor communication and even lost crucial pieces of evidence. And now it's almost impossible to know what truly happened that night. But another review was done by a medical examiner this time, and just like the French authorities, they concluded that Oog was murdered. Blood splatter was found on the outside wall of the apartment, and it likely came from Oog raising his arm in self-defense as he was being stabbed. This medical examiner believes that he was attacked from the lower landing of the front stairs. But now the question remains, who would do this and why? His friends have a few theories. Oog was reportedly a big flirt and would hook up with a lot of women. So one theory is that a scorned or jealous partner killed him that night. But Oog was also known to occasionally use cocaine. So another theory is that he somehow got involved with the wrong dealer. And according to the medical examiner, with how deadly the stab wounds were, they believe whoever killed him has a criminal history. Adding to this theory, his neighbor did have a security camera that captured Oog returning home that night, but it never showed anyone leaving his house that night either. It was a motion-activated security camera, and it was pretty blurry at that. It wouldn't have taken much to see that camera, and like investigators said, anybody casing the house would know how to stay out of the camera's view. With the overwhelming evidence that we do have, it just doesn't seem like Oog could have or would have done this to himself. But it's now been 17 years, and whoever killed him has never been found. Whatever happened to Oog that summer night remains a mystery.
This is Jellyfish Arms, one of the worst prison videos ever, explained. Before I begin, I just want to say this video is an extremely hard watch and I don't recommend looking for it. The video that I'm about to explain is under 1.5 minutes long, and as you play the video, you see a steel barred jail cell which looks like it's holding several men. It's hard to see what's going on, but it appears multiple men are straining and holding down one man. On the outside of the cell are 3 inmates. 2 are holding what appears to be 2 thick wooden sticks or metal pipes. It's hard to tell because of the quality, but I think it's 2 metal pipes. It's hard to explain, but the man who is being held down has his arms extended through the prison bars. To visualize it, picture yourself in a jail cell and sticking your arms to the bars and extending your arms out. One of the men outside of the cell is holding a rope that is tied to the victim's arm, and he is pulling it tightly so that the arm is completely outstretched and straight. The 2 men with the metal pipes then start hitting the victim's outstretched arm. After every hit, you see lumps appear on the arm almost instantly. They are hitting him so hard and often that lacerations appear. The screaming from the victim gets more and more intense, and after several strikes, the man holding the rope reduces the tension and shakes the victim's arm. You can see that he has several bones broken in his forearm, and his arm is partially floppy at this point. It's worth noting that a bed sheet has been placed and pulled over the victim's head in order to reduce the screaming. Once again, they strike the same arm several more times. The man holding the rope then unties the arm as the prisoner pulls it back into the cell. His forearm is completely floppy, and he struggles to even pull it through the cell bars. And as you guessed, it doesn't get any better from here. They then take the other arm, tie it up, and pull it through the cell bars once again so the arm is outstretched. They then strike the arm multiple times, and despite the loud nature of the inmates and their attempt to muffle the victim's screams, You can still hear them, and that mixed with the sound the metal bar makes when it hits the victim's arm is just sickening. At 1 minute and 26 seconds into the video, it finally concludes. This is a terrible watch, and there's little to no backstory behind it, but many speculate it was just a normal gang attack, but others say it was a punishment for stealing in prison, which makes sense as they were incapacitating his arms. Regardless, it's a very sickening video, and I don't recommend watching it.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminated in acts of cannibalism.
Imagine getting stuck in your own house and dying. Well, this is one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. This is 38-year-old Mariessa Weber, who lived in Florida. She was a very petite person who was 5'3" and just under 100 pounds. On the evening of October 28, 2006, Mariessa would return home, say hello to her mother, and then go into her room like she always does. But then she was never seen again. The next morning, her mother realized she was gone, and her sister didn't hear from her. Nobody that she knew seen her or heard from her either. They searched the entire house and even her bedroom, but they didn't find her. So she was then reported as missing to the police department. People were thinking maybe she got kidnapped, maybe she fell into the wrong crowd. The issue with that was there was no forced entry into the home, there were no signs of forced entry into her bedroom, there was no signs of altercation that took place. It's literally as if she just vanished into thin air. A couple days would go by and the mother and sister would start to smell very bad smells throughout the house. They blamed this on rats that might have gotten stuck in the walls and died. Several more days would pass and the smell would keep getting worse and worse. The sister then goes into Mariessa's room once more and begins to look around, when she suddenly noticed something strange behind the bookshelf. Towards the higher part of the shelf, she noticed something that appeared to look like a human toe. The smell got worse as she approached the bookshelf and she then looked behind it. And she then noticed her sister. Mariessa was hanging upside down from this bookshelf and she was dead. Mariessa never left the house. She wasn't missing. For 12 whole days, she was stuck behind a bookshelf hanging upside down. It was determined that she was died from positional asphyxiation, which is when your body is upside down and it's not getting the oxygen it needs, and all of the blood is rushing towards your head and you eventually pass out. Now, nobody knows how long she was alive while she was in this position. Some people have lost consciousness between 40 and 60 seconds in this position, and some people have been able to stay in that position for hours before they were rescued or before they died. But at least for a few minutes, Mariessa was in extreme pain, and she was probably calling for help, but somehow in some way, nobody heard her. This death is something straight out of a nightmare, and may Mariessa Weber rest in peace.
This is Police Chief Martin Brody. He ran the Amity Island Police Department in the 1970s. One summer, during a beach party, Christy Watkins was attacked and killed in the sea with her remains being found the next day. Brody wanted the beach shut down, but Mayor Larry Vaughan advised against this due to the impending arrival of summer tourists. He said it would ruin their economy if they closed the beach. Believing a shark attacked Christy, a bounty is placed on its head and a huge tiger shark is soon caught. The beach was then reopened. Later, after no human remains were found inside the tiger shark, a packed July 4th beach suffered an attack from a great white shark. Quint, Brody and Hooper set sail on the orca in an attempt to capture and kill it. A back and forth battle then took place with Quint being eaten by the shark. The shark was finally destroyed when a scuba tank was placed in its mouth and shot by Brody, causing it to explode. Because after all, this is the Creeper. He's an ancient demonic monster who becomes active every 23rd spring for 23 days and feasts on the body parts of humans. Trish and Darry Jenner once spotted the Creeper sliding what looked like dead bodies down a pipe which was sticking out of the ground. When they searched the pipe, they found hundreds of bodies sewn together, including those of Kenny and Darla, who went missing 23 years earlier. They fled to a gas station where they received a call from a psychic. She played them the song Jeepers Creepers and said if they ever hear it, they're in danger. When the police arrived, they told the couple the church next to the pipe had been set alight. The underground lair, known as the House of Pain, was therefore destroyed. The police then heard the song Jeepers Creepers and were soon killed by the Creeper. It was run over by the couple but remained alive. It then feasted on some prisoners to heal itself. A cat and mouse chase ended with the Creeper escaping out of a window. He then removed Darry's eyes and replaced his own with them. which echoes the song lyrics, "Where'd you get those peepers?" He was soon back on the road hunting for more victims.
Nearly 200 decaying bodies have been found at a Colorado funeral home. Police in Colorado made a very grim discovery earlier this month. The remains of at least 189 people were found at a funeral home in Pensaw. It's reported that this came after it was reported there was an abhorrent smell coming from inside of the building. Police showed up on the 4th of October and were stunned by what they found. It's believed that the number of bodies is expected to increase pending further investigation. Families of the deceased found at the Return to Nature funeral home are devastated by the discovery. There's now the huge job underway of identifying all of the deceased people. This will include using dental records and DNA testing. The owner of the funeral home admitted that there has been a problem there. A potential criminal investigation is underway. Imagine getting a speeding fine for $1.4 million. That happened to one man in Georgia. On the 2nd of September 2023, Connor Cato was doing 90 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone. He was pulled over by police and was absolutely stunned by the speeding fine that he received. Now, they issued him the speeding fine via e-ticket, and when he got home and accessed the ticket, he saw that it stated $1.4 million. He incorrectly assumed that it was a typo and rang them up. On the phone, the member of staff told him that it was actually correct and he was to either pay the amount or show up in court. Now, it transpires that the city of Savannah does this intentionally to get people to attend court. They stated the balance reflected is a placeholder, not a fine. The fine for a super speeder ticket can only be set by a judge. Since super speeders are required to go to court, the software automatically puts in a base amount plus state mandated costs. Even the criminal defense attorney stated that he had never seen something like that before in his life.
Rage quitted at a Madden esports tournament and shot 2 people to death. My name is David Katz and this is my story. At the age of 24, I was a full-time professional Madden player from Baltimore, Massachusetts. I was really good, and in August 2018, I made the trip to Jacksonville for a tournament. I started my professional career in 2017, and in the 3 years as a pro, I've amassed the immense fortune of $10,000. The tournament in Jacksonville started in the morning, and this time things didn't go well for me. I played a few games and lost them all. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't used to such a mediocre performance. I was eliminated from the tournament and had no chance of winning. In my rage, I refused to shake hands with the other competitors and left the tournament in a state of extreme madness. I grabbed one of my handguns that I had taken with me to Jacksonville and walked back to the venue. I was sick of losing, and the other players mocking me made me even more angry. I decided to enter the building and opened fire on everyone in there. When it was all said and done, I had killed 2 people and injured 10 others. I then put the gun to my head and took my own life. This horrible event has rekindled the debate about the dangers of video games. Have you ever heard of this story? Tell me in the comments and subscribe for even more stories.
This woman faked her own kidnapping and thought that she could get away with it. On July 13th, 25-year-old Carly Russell called police to report a child wandering on the side of the road. When police arrived to the scene, they found her car along with her wig and her phone, but Carly and the child were not there. Police now thought, okay, not only do we have a missing child, but now we have a missing 25-year-old woman. 49 hours after Carly went missing and after the story was all over the news, she randomly showed up to her family's house, and everyone, including the police, were confused. And this is what she had to say. She said that after she spoke to police on the phone, she was forced into a car by a man with orange hair. She then says that she was able to escape, but then she was recaptured and forced to get naked and take photos. But then Carly was able to get away again, and this time she ran through the woods and made it home. Police noticed that Carly's story was just not making sense. Investigators noted that Carly drove over 600 yards while on the phone with 911 when she specifically said that she was following the little kid. Carly's internet searches were also weird. She was searching the movie Taken, which, if you know, it's about a woman being abducted. Eventually, Carly's lawyer made a statement that she made this whole thing up. She was charged and ordered to pay $18,000 in restitution and spend 1 year in prison. I guess she did this all for attention, but I mean, she did get it.
Wiped millions from banks just to help out poor kids in Palestine, and now they're trying to hit me with the death sentence. My name is Hamza Bendelaj, and I'm here to share you how I became a modern-day Robin Hood. At 27, I was a tech enthusiast from Algeria with a deep passion for hacking. I've always felt a profound empathy for the less fortunate, especially the Palestinian people who have been through so much. In 2017, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hacked into 217 American banks, stealing over $4 billion. But this money wasn't for me. I immediately donated every single penny to charities in Palestine, aiming to provide some relief to those in need. However, my actions caught the attention of the authorities, and it wasn't long before I was apprehended. The judges showed no mercy, sentencing me to death for my crimes. But as I walked to my execution, I had no regrets. I smiled, knowing that my actions had potentially saved thousands of lives. I believed I had served a greater good, even if it cost me my life. My story quickly spread across social media, turning me into a sensation and sparking a global debate about justice, morality, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Millions praised my actions, while others debated the ethics of my methods. Don't hesitate to hit like and comment your thoughts on this complex situation. And remember to subscribe for more thought-provoking stories.
This former YouTuber was arrested after committing the most unspeakable crimes against his own child, and he was later found hanging in his prison cell. I want to give you a trigger warning before I talk about this because this case is disturbing. This is Carl Harold. He was born in the early 1980s and he was a computer whiz. So Carl uploaded his first YouTube video in July of 2012. In these videos, he was instructing people on how to program computers, and shockingly, his channel is still up on YouTube to this day. As you can see here, he had around 30,000 subscribers before he was arrested, and due to fascination about this guy after the crime, I think that's why some of his videos have substantial amounts of views. So Carl seemed like a very harmless guy. He had a 9-year-old son, he was living his best life. That is, until December of 2013 when Carl was arrested with another man named Charles Dunavant. Carl and Charles were domestic and romantic partners, and they were arrested for disturbing crimes. So these two sickos who lived with each other in Alabama actually held Carl's son hostage for 8 months straight. Keep in mind, Carl had a 9-year-old son. And what these two men did to the boy was unspeakable. They were charged with crimes like sexual torture, exposing a minor to an STD, sodomy, and yes, in a dark twist, the production of CP. So Carl and Charles were part of a larger CP network that existed on the dark web. And like I said, for 8 months they had been holding Carl's son hostage, abusing him in horrific ways, taking photos and videos of all of this and uploading it to this ring on the internet. In a news article that I read about this case, the Alabama police officers actually couldn't report on what they had found in the house, like the photos and videos, because they claimed it was so horrific they couldn't bear to look at the content. So that just goes to show how truly twisted these two people were. Now, they were going to be co-defendants and tried together, but about exactly a year to the day after Carl Harold was arrested, he was found hanged in his jail cell. He had taken his own life before he had to face the repercussions for these terrible acts. Eventually, though, Charles Dunavant was sentenced to 36 years in prison. And while I don't think that that's nearly long enough, at least he didn't take the easy way out like Carl. And I hope that his life in prison is absolutely as horrific as it could possibly be. It is eerie though, thinking that YouTube has kept Carl's channel online. And I think it's definitely one of the channels that YouTube should look at terminating. This news reporter took her own life on live TV. This is Christine Chubbuck. She was born in Hudson, Ohio in 1944. And in her adult life, she earned a broadcasting degree and started working for various news TV stations. Throughout her life, Christine worked in Cleveland, in Pittsburgh, in Canton, Ohio, but eventually she ended up in Sarasota, Florida. Now, Christine spoke with her family members at length throughout her life about her struggles with depression and her ideation of the thought of taking her own life. She had been seeing a psychiatrist for several weeks leading up to her own death, and it's a widespread belief that it was Christine's lack of focus on intimate personal relationships that led her to take her own life. So it's been reported that Christine had a crush on her coworker George. At one point, she baked him a cake for his birthday and she sought out some sort of a romantic connection with George, but she was crushed to find out that he was already intimately involved with another reporter. Throughout her time at the station in Sarasota, Florida, Christine exhibited some concerning behavior. She was rude and standoffish to people who made friendly gestures toward her. She didn't really seem like she wanted to make friends. And a week before she took her own life, she told the night news editor, a man named Rob, that she had recently bought a gun and joked about taking her own life on air. Now, Rob brushed this off and said he didn't want to respond to this sick humor, but he had no idea that Christine was actually being serious. So a few days before she took her own life, Christine hosted a party. And a lot of her co-workers, fellow reporters attended this party, and they saw that Christine was completely different. She seemed to be so happy. She was having fun. She was carefree. One sportscaster that was at the party even stated later on that this was a completely different side of Christine, and that they didn't realize this was her going away party, her way to say goodbye. Then came the morning of July 15th, 1974. On that morning, Christine confused her coworkers by stating she had to read a newscast before the program she hosted, which she never did. So she spent 8 minutes reading off local news stories, headlines, and even covered a story about a shooting that had happened in Sarasota. But when it came time to play the newsreel about the shooting that had already been filmed, Christine broke the script. So I'm going to read this quote to you. She looked at the camera and said, "In keeping with the WXLT practice of presenting the most immediate and complete records of local blood and guts news, TV40 presents what is believed to be a television first, in living color, an exclusive coverage of an attempted unaliving." Christine then pulled out a revolver and shot herself behind her right ear. She fell forward violently, and the director of the television program then faded the screen to black. The station then ran a standard public service announcement and began playing a movie. Eerily, when the news director then found the papers that Christine had been reading from, he discovered that the entire thing had been scripted and written out by Christine. This included the stories she was going to cover, the act of actually taking her own life, and it even included a third-person perspective of what the next person taking over on the broadcast should read to the audience. Christine was then taken to a local hospital where she was pronounced dead 14 hours later. So for years, the television station that aired this footage claimed that the actual footage, the tape of Christine doing this, was lost forever. And people considered this to be a piece of lost media, meaning a piece of footage that existed at one point but doesn't exist anymore. But back in 2016, the station said that they had actually located the video. But obviously, they're never going to release it, and I don't think they should. Either way, Christine was remembered with fondness by everybody around her. She had a big funeral. Lots of people, public officials came forward and attended the funeral and said that she was just an amazing person. And obviously, this is such a tragic story. And it was indeed the very first time that somebody had taken their own life on live TV.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? Nothing there.
In 2001, a woman named Fatima Rehman began writing to Charles, and after visiting him a number of times, she married him. Charles briefly converted to his wife's faith of Islam and wished to be called Charles Ali Ahmed. His marriage to Fatima lasted for 4 years, and during this time, Charles appealed his life sentence. On this occasion, references from psychologists were quite positive, and Charles told the court how Fatima and her daughter were helping to rehabilitate him. Despite this, his appeal was rejected. Charles remained a Category A prisoner at Wakefield Prison, and in 2008 he was due a parole hearing. Charles's lawyer was given a 1-hour parole interview, which he refused, saying that he needed a full day to deal with Charles's case. The hearing was delayed and actually took place in March 2009, and Charles was denied parole. In 2013, a petition signed by 10,000 people was presented to 10 Downing Street, calling for Charles's release. It included a note from Charles himself to David Cameron, asking for his release and saying that he wished to live the rest of his life on the outside instead of being buried in the prison system. Nothing became of the petition, and Charles continued with prison life. In 2014, Charles discovered that some of his mail was being withheld, including 2 letters from his mother. He attacked the prison governor, resulting in serious bruising, and 2 years were added to his sentence. After this incident, he changed his name by deed poll to Charles Salvador, saying Charles Bronson came alive in 1987 and he died in 2014. Under his new name, he began creating brilliant works of art described as fantasy reality, and some of these were auctioned in October 2014. He used the money to buy his mother a holiday. In 2017, actress Paula Williamson began writing to Charles. They quickly started a relationship and Charles proposed on Valentine's Day. The couple married at Wakefield Prison on November 14th. Paula led a bizarre procession through Wakefield before being bundled into the prison under a purple cloak. The couple walked down the aisle to the death march and then Charles was led back to his cell while Paula went to her wedding reception. The reception was held at the York House Hotel in Wakefield, and some of the guests included Katie Price's former flame Alex Reid and ex-boxer Andrew Parkin, and a Bronson lookalike with which Paula had her first dance. The marriage didn't last too long and was annulled after Charles saw pictures in the media of Paula on holiday with other men. There was also a disagreement over Charles wanting Paula to wear a catsuit to visit him in prison. In 2018, Charles was accused of attacking the governor at Wakefield Prison over his guests not being allowed to take pictures at his wedding. He was also angry at the fact that he hadn't been allowed to wear a suit to his own wedding, instead having to walk down the aisle in a stripy green and yellow jumpsuit. He's said to have lunged at the governor, knocking him to the floor, and threatened to gouge his eyes out and bite his nose off. Charles denied this, saying that all he intended to do was give the governor a gentle bear hug and ask where his wedding pictures were, when someone tripped him and he fell into the governor, knocking him to the floor. He said, "For the first time in my 44 years in prison, I never intended to be violent. I didn't intend to hurt the governor." Charles was found not guilty and was moved to Woodhill Prison. Over the years, Charles has raised thousands of pounds selling his belongings and artwork, all of which has gone to charity. In 2016, he auctioned one of his pieces of art to raise money for treatment with a child with cerebral palsy. He's also put his artwork up for sale at exhibitions, saying that he hopes it'll increase his chances at parole by demonstrating that he could have an occupation if he's released. Charles is also a successful author, writing 16 books. One, a book of poetry with his friend Richard Booth pictured above, a book detailing his friendship with the Cray twins, and also a book of his artwork, among others. In 2020, Charles won a High Court battle for his parole board hearing to be held in public, citing his right to a fair trial. And on Monday, March 6, 2023, his parole board hearing began. He told the panel at HMP Woodhill, "I'm terrified of the consequences of my actions. I know if I do something serious ever again, I'll die in prison. I'm anti-crime, I am anti-violence. All I want to do is go out and do my art." He was wearing a dark suit, dark tie and white shirt with green braces, and his signature round glasses. He now needs to wear dark lenses in his glasses, as 40 years in solitary confinement has made his eyes sensitive to light. When asked about his confrontations with prison guards over the years, he said it was always in response to being treated badly. He said, "A rumble clears the air. What man doesn't love a rumble? I know I do. But I'm too old to fight now. If someone wanted to make a name by attacking me now, I'd say, 'Come on mate, there's a cafe over there. Let's go and have a cup of tea.'" His prison offender manager said that he's made really good progress and has been rehabilitated over the last 12 years. But she fears that he might not cope if he's moved from his close supervision centre of 8 people into an open community. Charles's parole hearing is ongoing and a decision on his release is imminent. This is the story of the infamous Charles Bronson, not to be confused with cult leader and mass murderer Charles Manson. Believe it or not, Bronson's never actually killed anyone. So how does a young boy once described by his aunt as a kind, gentle, loving boy turn into one of Britain's most notorious prisoners? I'll take you right back to the beginning. He was born Michael Peterson on December 6, 1952, in Luton, Bedfordshire, to parents Ira and Joe. Michael's aunt described him as a loving, gentle, kind, mild-mannered boy who would always stand up for the weak and defend them against their bullies. When he was a teenager, his parents moved him and his 2 brothers to Cheshire. This is when he started getting into trouble. He was caught stealing at 13 and reprimanded in juvenile court. He returned to Luton, which he describes as his hometown, and continued to get into trouble. One night he got into an argument with one of his girlfriend's fathers and smashed up a load of parked cars. This landed him with a fine and probation. He then decided to steal a lorry and smashed it into a parked car that had somebody sat inside. For For this, he received another fine and again probation. And then he decided to take part in a smash and grab raid. This landed him with a suspended sentence. This is all before he even turned 20. In 1971, Michael met Irene Kelsey. She said that he was different to other boys. He was very well groomed, wore tailored suits, had perfectly groomed sideburns and a Cockney accent. Irene soon fell pregnant and they got married at Chester Register Office. In 1974, and after a few years out of trouble, and despite the fact he was now a father, Michael stepped up his criminal career and took part in an armed robbery. This landed him with a 7-year sentence. He was first sent to Walton Prison, but after attacking 2 prisoners, he was transferred to Hull. In Hull Prison, he had an altercation with a prison officer in which he smashed up a workshop and had to be injected with a sedative. This got him another 6 months added to his sentence. Michael was constantly in trouble and in and out of solitary confinement. At one point, he attacked fellow prisoner John Henry Gallagher with a glass jug. This got him another 9 months added to his sentence. For the next 2 years, Michael was constantly moved between Pankhurst, Wakefield, Armley and Walton due to his violent behaviour. And he was eventually transferred from Yorkshire to London, chained to the floor of a prison van. In 1976, he was briefly moved back to Pankhurst, where he befriended Ronnie and Reggie Cray. He describes them as the best 2 guys he's ever met. Michael was then handed divorce papers from his wife Irene, and this only fueled his anger. He attacked another prisoner, threatened to kill a prison guard, and was caught trying to dig his way out of his cell. In 1978, Michael attempted suicide, and it was decided that he'd be transferred under the Mental Health Act to Rampton Secure Hospital. Michael really struggled to adapt to forced medication, and he hated being surrounded by mentally ill patients. He said he saw people running into walls using their heads as battering rams and stabbing themselves with pens, needles and scissors. While at Rampton, Michael attempted to kill child rapist and murderer John White. He described John as a slimy rat that had evil all over his face. His plan was simple. If he killed the monster, he'd be sent to court and sent back to a normal prison. He also said that he'd be doing the world a favour by ridding it of John White. He waited until they were in the day room together, crept up behind John, whipped off his tie and wrapped it round his neck. All of the other patients were watching. Some were laughing, some just staring. Just as John stopped breathing, 2 guards managed to run over and prise Michael's hands off him, saving his life. Michael said he heard shouts for oxygen as he was dragged back to his cell, laughing hysterically. He said he'd gone completely mad. He was injected with a sedative that made him violently ill. He was extremely disappointed when he learned that John White had survived the attack. Michael was soon transferred to Broadmoor, where he was reunited with Ronnie Cray. After a failed attempt at strangling fellow prisoner George Robinson, Michael's mood was extremely low. Ronnie arranged a visit from former world boxing champion Tony Downs, and this really lifted Michael's spirits. Michael decided to get back to full fitness, and he soon came up with a plan to climb up to the roof and let out some anger. He made it through a cell window, climbed up a drain pipe, and made it to the roof of Broadmoor. He began throwing tiles off the top of the roof, saying that each one represented a year he'd spent locked up. Michael said he felt like he was emptying himself of years of pain. He spent the night looking up at the stars for the first time in 8 years, and then climbed down in the morning and went back inside. When Michael was refused a transfer, he decided to go on an 18-day hunger strike. He was eventually transferred to Ashworth Hospital. For the next year, he was moved between Risley, Albany, Wormwood Scrubs, Winchester, Wandsworth, and finally Gartree. In 1987, Michael was finally released after spending 13 years behind bars. He spent a few days living with his parents before buying a water pistol, modifying it to look like a gun, and intimidating a stranger to drive him to Luton. Michael's longtime friend Reggie Cray then persuaded him to take up an illegal career in bare knuckle boxing in London's East End, and on the advice of his fight promoter, he changed his name to Charles Bronson. By 1988, Charles had a girlfriend, and much to her surprise on New Year's Day, he robbed a jewellery store, gave her a ring from his stash, and sold the rest. Just a week later, and after only 2 months of freedom, Charles was arrested on his morning jog and returned to prison. His girlfriend actually acted as the key witness, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years. Once again, Charles found himself being moved between various prisons for his violent behaviour. At Full Sutton, he punched a prisoner, a prison officer, and threw water over the governor. He spent a month at Durham, where he befriended a family of rodents that crept into his cell, and he was then moved to Long Lartin. He seemed to settle well at this prison until one day something sent him over the edge, and he ran riot in the nude, clutching a spear that he'd made out of a broken bottle and a broom handle. Over the next 3 years, he was moved between Wandsworth, Gartree, where he punched 2 prison officers, and Frankland, where he took the deputy governor hostage. In 1992, while imprisoned at Pankhurst, he was on the receiving end of an attack where he was stabbed in the back several times by 2 other inmates. He refused to talk to police about the attack and recovered without any further incidents. He was then released from prison in November 1992. Charles was a free man for a total of 53 days before again being arrested, this time for conspiracy to rob and possession of a sawn-off shotgun. While on remand, he took a librarian hostage and demanded an inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea. He eventually released his prisoner after being disgusted that he'd broken wind in front of him. On September 14, 1993, Charles was found guilty of intent to rob and given an 8-year sentence. He was taken to Wakefield Prison, where he spent a total of 40 days naked in isolation before being transferred to Hull. While at Hull, he took the deputy governor